Well, I want to welcome you all to Delphi, to the Delphi Economic Forum, the 10th Delphi Economic Forum. And I think that the question that our panel poses couldn't be more timely if we think what happened in the last 24 hours with President Trump and the tariffs, of course. So, is the current European model outdated? Does Europe and the European Union make reforms so that Europe can be competitive in this multipolar world? I want to begin with you, Marco Buti, to tell me, first of all, before we start discussing if Europe is outdated, if European model is outdated, what is exactly now, today, the European model?
Thank you very much for the invitation. As you say, things are unfolding by the minute, so maybe we have to watch what is popping up during the panel, because you never know. Nonetheless, I think it's very important to have to try to understand what is the underlying trends, because these they are still there. Now there is this lot of shocks and noise around the trend, which is amplifying by the day, but the trends are still there. So I think in the positive way, I am very attached to the European social model, the way we understand it, which is a unique on the world stage combination of equity and efficiency. Obviously evolving over time, but presenting to citizens and encompassing a balance which is, and you see it nowadays, often lost elsewhere. So combination equity, efficiency, which is naturally also linked to the, our democratic system where we are very attached to. Now this model is threatened. There are some underlying trends beside the shocks we are seeing nowadays. And I would like to summarize maybe the three elements which make the, let's say, the European economic and social model somewhat at risk. Okay, and I take three indicators, all beginning with two. So just also to give a bit of an image of that. Okay, the first one is that if you take, here is a study by McKinsey of a few months ago, if you take the last, the 10 leading technologies, so shaping our present and our future, in terms of innovation, production, and diffusion, then Europe is at the forefront with only two of these, compared to the US and compared to China. So we are well positioned in terms of clean manufacturing, development on new materials. On all the rest, we are lagging behind. We're thinking about AI as the prime example of that. So this is one thing. We are the risk of drifting away from the technology frontier. The second one is demography. So here, median age over the past 10 years, past, no future, has increased by over 2 years, 2.2 years. So the demographic winter is already with us. It's not something that relates to the long term. And the third one, the third tool, which is, I left it last because it's very much related to the current events, is that Europe and the euro area in particular runs a persistent current account surplus of over 2%. Countries within the EU, Germany in particular, 6% plus. Now, in the past, how many times we have heard, especially on the northern side of Europe, including Germany, sign of great competitiveness. We export a lot. See how good we are. The reality is that, as it was discussed in the previous panel, actually, that was mentioned, persist the current account surplus, which is the opposite of what the US has, we produce too many savings and not enough investment opportunities. So these savings somehow they find a way out of the EU. And we know, and we see it right now, that this is a clear sign of vulnerability. So we will have to make sure that our growth becomes, more domestic, more indigenous. Obviously, remaining open to the rest of the world, but that is I think the way forward. And here, I think on the what to do, little doubts. The big thing is the how, and creating the political conditions in order to, deliver what has been, outlined very clearly in the Letta report last year, in the Draghi report back in September. So the how is essential, creating the political conditions for that. Draghi said, and I stop here, and that is September, so not a long time ago, said, okay, we risk a slow agony if we do not. And slow agony means that we are not going to be able to preserve that balance between equity and efficiency, leading to sustainable growth that I mentioned before. Now, in the present circumstances, I think we are at a bifurcation. I think probably slow agony is not the central scenario anymore. Either we react and then we seize the opportunities, or really the risk of an implosion, especially if divisions within the EU prevails, I think is a clear and present danger.
Well, Charlotte Ruhe, and the European Union, to take from what Marco said, the European Union is not used in doing things very fast. So will US, Donald Trump, the new order of things, make us move very, very fast? And what are the current problems?
Okay, look, I agree with everything Mr. Buti just said. What I would say is Europe it retains this strong soft power, and that is about rule of law, that's about transparency, it's about the vision of a better future for oneself and one's family. And I think that is why Europe maintains this magnetic pull for people, whether from Western Balkans, where I do a lot of work, but also globally, people want to come to Europe. You see Americans wanting to come to Europe now, too. I think that there's strains, though, on the existing system, and these include the pressure on the fiscal side of increasing defense expenditure. Part of the European social contract has been affordable because Europe didn't spend that much on defense in previous decades. Now, if defense spending is going to ramp up, there's going to be less fiscal space for some of this social spending, and I see an opportunity for governments to deal with that effectively through things like PPPs and by increasing the capital markets, development and integration in Europe. Greece is a great example on the PPPs. We have a program with the government where we have prepared $2.5 billion worth of projects, 13 different projects, infrastructure that will not be financed by the government budget. But looking at, I see the U.S. as really losing this aggrandized position in the imagination and the view of everyone last September. We sat in the Eurofee and heard Letta speak and others about this, we're so behind U.S. on, innovation, competitiveness, et cetera. But Europe has other strengths, and I think they show now. And policy predictability matters. One of the reasons why everybody's so anxious is nobody knows what's coming out of the White House in the next 15 minutes. You can't run an economy that is one of the biggest in the world this way. And the European economy is run in a predictable way by serious professionals. So I'll stop there.
Michael Arghyrou, your answer to if our model is outdated and if all of these things that we talked until now, I mean democracy, our values, are at risk because things change so fast, and if we don't change faster, we may lose what we have.
I think that the European model, when it comes to its objectives and its core values, is not outdated at all, really. What is perhaps in need of overhaul is the way we go about delivering these objectives. So the cornerstone of the European way of doing things is basically the adherence to liberal democracy, which basically is based on open political institutions, political freedom, and human rights, and open economic institutions, which means that basically there are opportunities for people to improve their well-being. This results into, over the past decades at least, good growth, improving in living standards, and also in Europe we have this very highly valued emphasis on inclusiveness. We want safety nets which make sure that we avoid negative, extreme negative outcomes for individuals within our societies. We are, if you like, more compassionate societies compared to other places. Now, these core values are the right values, and I don't think really that anybody, or at least the vast majority of Europeans, would like to question them. But is our present capacity to deliver on these objectives still able to do the job? And this is where probably we need to make changes. So it is true, Mark already mentioned it, that over the past 20 years or so, our competitiveness in the global economic field has declined. I don't speak about our ability to export things which are low technology or mid technology. We have probably been left behind when it comes to our ability to provide innovation and provide progress on disruptive technologies. There it is something that we need to raise our game. I think also that in Europe so far we have had this, understandably to some extent, nation-state mindset. We are a collection, we are a union of sovereign states, and each of us wants to have certain things. And this creates decision-making difficulties, and sometimes it is difficult to reform when you don't have the consensus. So probably we need more emphasis on the union decision-making level rather than the nation decision-making level. This means that we need to coordinate better. And finally, a third thing is that we probably have not been very good at raising awareness within our societies about the challenges of the present economic environment. So what I'm trying to say is that in order to achieve these objectives, we should accelerate reforms, but socially reforms are feasible and sustainable when they are accepted by a critical mass. So an important thing that we need to make is to raise the demand for reforms. Otherwise, we will be obliged, and in Greece we have some very characteristic experience on this, to deliver reforms in a reactive way after the damage has been done and after we have suffered the cost. So I think that when it comes to actual policy making, and probably we can discuss this a little bit later, we need on the one hand to invest in our competitiveness, and that is why this agenda that we have now in Europe about completing capital markets to sort out the finance, the emphasis on human capital, etc., is very correct. But what I want to say is that even if we manage to produce the most competitive things on this planet, the most qualitative ones, etc., if markets outside Europe are close to us, and don't forget that we export 50% of the European GDP abroad, if these markets are close to us, as they seem to be closing now, where will we sell? So I think that it is very right, on the one hand, to focus on the supply side of the European economy to be more productive, more innovative, more competitive, but also invest on the demand side of the European economy to ensure that we are each other's most effective safety net, most effective insurance. The United States exports 12% of its GDP. We export 50%. So we need, I think, for resilience purposes and for insurance purposes, to increase our domestic economic activity, and I'm not saying that we should start giving money through a helicopter way so that we have fiscal transfers and basically we raise demand through that way. What I'm saying is that we should invest in the supply side of each European member state so that each European member state can contribute sustainable growth-led demand so that we are strategically more autonomous.
Well, as a matter of fact, what you are saying is that we need also brave politicians that can convince people that we need drastically to reform. Ivailo, Izvorski, is our model outdated after all?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm the Chief Economist for Europe and Central Asia at the World Bank. And because we focus on the developing countries of Europe, since 1990, 27 countries around the world have become high income. 13 of them are in the European Union. Every country that's a member of the EU was either a high income country when it joined or has become a high income economy. To me, this is the strength of the European model. Takes middle income countries and converts them into high income economies. It's fantastic, right? Whether it's through alignment of institutions, more trade and investment, I think this has worked. What obviously what the EU has stumbled is that we are behind on productivity, we're behind on income per capita, we're behind on innovation, something my colleagues mentioned here. You know, of 166 unicorns, companies that with value more than $1 billion over the last 3 years, 2/3 of the financing has gone to the US, only 6% in the EU. In a continent or in an economic area that generates massive savings, but these obviously don't go into innovation, they stay in the banks, something that Mr. Draghi pointed out in his report. On productivity, comparison with others, and in this case in the United States, is a useful metric, right? That's productivity relative to the US has fallen dramatically, but it's also a value in its own self. Regardless of what the comparison with the US would have been, productivity in Europe is so low that over the last 3 years, the continent has barely grown by about 1%. Projections for this year, less than 0.5%, probably so for next year. How can you, with these growth rates, produce innovation? How can you support the social model? How can you deliver on your climate goals, now on defense? Is this compatible? And to me, it's not. And so sooner or later, or actually very soon, the EU would have to make a choice because a dramatic choice is coming. Now, why all of these things were known 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right, before the Draghi report, before the Letta report, there were many other reports. There were reports from the early 2000s, how to make the EU bigger, bolder, and better in the face of new accession countries that came in force. And so what is the Union doing? What is the Union doing given the fact that a huge chunk of global manufacturing capacity is now concentrated in China? I mean, it is very difficult for the EU to be competitive, or for any other country to be competitive, given what's happening in China. Energy prices here spiked after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They have come down, but they're still much, much higher than they were before the invasion. So how, in the face of manufacturing capacity going to China, lagging innovation, jump in the region, high energy prices, how can the EU remain competitive? I think this is the crucial question. Mr. Buti mentioned that Mario Draghi's report came in September, actually came 7 months to the day, came on the 9th of September. What has been done since then? What has been done over 7 months? Well, the EU came up with something called Competitiveness Compass, which was a rephrasing of the Draghi report. Has anything been done at the EU level to address these very urgent issues? I don't think so. At the national level, to address these very urgent issues, the issue of defense is coming up, right? How do we manage energy prices? How do we manage rising China? I mean, obviously, current developments are speaking to that as well. So I think we face the model is very strong. I think it has an opportunity to deliver for all these new member states that are going to come, hopefully in the future, the Balkans and others. But I think institutions really have to be much more flexible and adaptable to these challenges. Otherwise, a choice is going to be terrible between, again, the social model, the economic model, the climate ambitions. I think it's not going to work out long term. Thank you.
So, Marco, if you would choose 3 reforms to do first, what would you do in the European model, and how can we overcome the many differences inside the EU? We see the rise of the far-right parties. We see parties that govern in some countries in the EU that are pro-Russian or pro-Trump or whatever. So what would you suggest?
Okay, I see many students here, very young people, so some of them, they study economic statistics, I'm sure. So okay, let me put it like that. The US makes a lot of type 1 errors, and the EU makes type 2 errors. What does it mean? It means that the US does things it shouldn't. And that's what, I mean, the experience of these days. Europe does not do things that it should. That's the type 2 errors. And the point is that in the present circumstances, the cost of type 2 errors, which means, you know, missing opportunities, increases a lot. So, and that clearly we have a system which is, you know, very heavy.
Yeah.
Okay,
slow.
let me give you one thing that touches a lot of you here on the Greek side, an example of that. You know, go back to 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, July 2015, Brexit debate. Now, this seems the prehistory, but
No,
at the time, I think, had we had a system like the US today, Greece would not be in the euro area anymore. I mean, at the end of the day, at the time, I think we, you know, prevented, and I worked at the Commission, very difficult circumstances. Jean-Claude Juncker put the foot down. We do not have adventures of this type. So, so I think having a bit of a complex institutional system sometimes prevents dramatic errors. But it is also true that it prevents to seize the you know, good opportunities. So what to do? I think first of all, now I think we have an opportunity to show that in the present environment of extreme uncertainty, pervasive instability, there is a pole of stability in the world. And it is Europe. You do not clearly maintain or affirm your role of stability if you stagnate. So we have to, you know, grow in a more sustainable way. Okay, unicorns are not here in Europe. Why so? Because typically unicorns are projects which are long in ideas and short in collateral. So normal banks do not finance this type of projects. They want solid collateral. If you have a great idea with, you know, which a risky project which could be a great success, but the likelihood of failure is not irrelevant, then you don't go to the bank. So we need to have really to put our capital in the savings and investment union, so capital markets union, because there, I mean, developing capital markets, you know, venture capital, business angels, private equity, I think is key for this type, to finance the type of innovative projects. So I think on that front, we'll have to clearly do something, but then one has to try to look at the whole movie. And the whole movie implies that we are not going to build a capital market union unless we make progress on issuing safe assets at the European level. I think it's politically difficult, but the debate is shifting also there. Look at the, you know, with the current geopolitical environment and the war, the Russian threats, etc., who would have said that, you know, countries on the northern rim, you know, belonging to the former frugal coalition, are now, you know, in favor of doing things together, also financed via EU bonds. So I think that is key, and leaving open certain certain projects which we are specialized in. Here, the typical pattern in Europe is the following: big crisis, we stare into the abyss, we take courageous decisions, the pressure goes down, we do not finish the job. That is the typical, the typical pattern, and we are suffering from the syndrome of a lump sum of political capital. So now everything is done in defense, and that seems to absorb the whole capital. But in fact, I mean, 6 months ago, Draghi, it is the agenda at the end of the day. One may put the emphasis more on one thing to another, but we cannot put all the eggs in the defense basket now. It is an important basket, but the rest is important as well, and we have to have this multi-pronged strategy to go forward.
Ms. Ruhe, do you agree that we can do both, and defense spending and yes, Ms. Ruhe. Yeah.
Look, I think that we can chew gum and walk at the same time, right? So I think that more than one thing can happen. And I think that it's exactly right that important moves are taken, like borrowing during the pandemic, that could be taken to a next level. And I think that it takes crises, though, to make that move. And yet, I feel hopeful that things are on a better track now, because I think that understanding the resilience referred to by Michael is really important to realize, you have to have your own proper capital market so that you can raise the money you want for the companies, or the companies in the European Union can raise domestically the money that they need to invest and grow. And I think that, yes, defense is a distraction, it's a bit of a headline, but I also think that breaking some of these sacred cows, that, there can't be common activity on defense, is also a good thing. Yes, there was always NATO, but now it's become an initiative within the European Union, and that was never the case. And I think that's an important change of mindset. We can do more together. So I feel more hopeful about making progress also on capital markets union and other priorities.
And you are hopeful that the leaders will agree to that, there will be a consensus, because that seems always to be a problem in the EU.
Well, you need for individual leaders to also pick up the flag and run with it. And we are working at EBRD on a project for integrating the back offices of the stock exchanges of 8 exchanges of Central and Southeast Europe. And one of the ministers now finance ministers really wants to champion this, and is calling for a meeting of the ministers to push this forward. And that's good, because we're a bank, we play an important role in development in the region, but it has to have a political champion. And we see that coming now, and I think that this kind of thing will happen with other issues as well.
Mr. Arghyrou, what do you think that should happen? What reforms should EU immediately take?
Well, it is a whole list, but the big picture is the following. In Europe, we need to finance a lot of investments. Investment needs have grown exponentially. Compared to the past, we have very significant needs in upgrading our competitiveness, which we have talked about, defense, of course. The climate-related investments are also very significant. And we have also the topic I discussed about cohesion. So there is a lot of money that has to be invested, and we have to be clear about this, that public budgets do not have all this money to finance all these projects. So here, in order to find the necessary money, we need to look at the private sector, and that is why it is so important to make sure, as Marco and Charlotte mentioned before, to take money from banks and put them into productive uses. Banks are the typical form of investment for European households, They will be, of course, there very prominently, but we need also to channel money into the capital markets because the capital markets are taking a more well-meaning, risky approach towards economic growth. So the debate about the capital markets union is not just fashionable, it is real and very important. And it is true also that in order to have a proper capital markets union, you need to have a banking union as well, because the banks are going to be investors themselves. So the first I would highlight is the question of financing, capital markets union and banking union, which is basically what we call now the investment and saving union. This is a very, very important reform. The second thing I would say is that the feedback we get from the investment community and the business community is that we are a little bit too heavy on regulation. I know that it is a buzzword, it is something that has come up in the last few months, but it is true that there seems to be a problem there. We're asking from business too many things, to comply with too many requirements. I'm not saying that we should cut corners and abandon safety regulation and undermine consumer rights and do things in a way which endangers anybody's safety. But what I'm saying is that we should really make an effort to become more efficient in this respect. And a third thing, which is never at the forefront of political news, but on the other side, it is probably the most important thing long term, is the investment in people. I am an academic by profession, so obviously here I have an extra interest, but if you have a look at the European outcomes in education, they are very worrying. Europe as a whole seems to be declining in terms of educational outcomes relative to countries like Asian countries, etc. If you don't have people who are well educated from very, very small age, here I speak about preschool age and across the whole spectrum of the education cycle, and of course the element of upskilling, reskilling during people's careers, if you don't have the human resources, then you cannot be competitive, you cannot be innovative, you cannot build because you will not have any foundations.
Elaborate a little bit about that. What do you mean? Why do you think that there is this lack of education,
well,
unquote?
Let me hedge by saying that I'm not putting the whole education sector into disrespect or into any kind of criticism. What I'm saying, however, is that the outcomes of the European educational system are not good. The PISA scores are very characteristic. And without having the human capital developed, it is very difficult in practice to have people who can work with advanced technologies. You cannot have people who can basically operate within groups, so you cannot have people with the right management skills. Basically, you do not develop your human capital, but the human capital is basically the source of everything at the end of the day. So it is never at the forefront of political news because there is never any immediate crisis about education as it is with housing, as it is with other things. But at the end of the day, it's the foundation. So if I were to pick three things that I would really highlight, is first and foremost for long-term investment in people, education. Second, I would say that it is important to become more business-friendly in Europe. And third, I would say that it is important to sort out the financing of the European economy. These are the three things, among many others.
Okay, Marco, do you want to interfere now? And then I will go to...
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
Yeah, okay.
No, I would like to give, you said, and very rightly so, simplify the... Now, I give you 4 very quick hints or precise suggestions on how to simplify. Because, I mean, this is, in the competitiveness compass, in the implementation of Draghi, the issue of, omnibus laws and simplifications is it's at the forefront. So I think if you do these 4 things, I think you simplify a lot, at least at the European, what comes out of Brussels. First one, go back to the initial Commission proposals, because many of the complications come in Parliament's and Council debate, adding all sorts of paraphernalia. Second, the Commission has to impact assess, in particular on the impact on the SMEs, these proposals. There is not such an obligation for Council and Parliament when they adopt amendments. So the second thing is that impact assess what is done during the process of negotiation. Third element, move from directives to regulations. The difference here is that regulations, European regulations are directly applicable, whilst directives, they have to translate at the national level, and disparities and gold plating takes place at that level there, and that creates a huge amounts of complication for SMEs who want to go work in the single market. And finally, and this is addressed to the Commission, implement the single market rules and sanctions, because too many times, they tend to forget. So I think do these 4 things, and I think you will be, in a pragmatic way, it would be a good start to begin simplify our regulatory framework.
Mr. Izvorski, your reforms and about financing, will the banks, the World Banks finance, is Europe not at risk?
Okay. So the single market is the EU's biggest assets. But the single market is completely underdeveloped in the area of services, and my colleagues mentioned finance. I mean, there was a recent IMF paper that said that the non-tariff barriers within the EU on goods are equivalent to a 44% tariff. On services, 110% tariff. Talk about tariffs. I mean, what a math. I mean, I have a friend who produces some trinkets in France, tries to put them on Amazon there, the German side, and then in order to, pay taxes, this and that, has to hire a separate lawyer in Germany, separate lawyer in France. What is going on? So this single market in services, I can get a law degree in Italy, I cannot practice in France. I mean, this single market in services is massively underdeveloped, and I think in finance, obviously, is a major issue, but I think we are nowhere close to finishing the integration of these markets. Second, the regulatory policies are not only overly burdensome, they're not harmonized. And so with such unharmonized policies, something has to be done. So I think, to me, this is the second most important thing. At least we have to have uniform regulation across the Union. The third, I think something has to be done about energy costs. And the Commission is talking about rethinking the Green Deal, nuclear energy, this and that and the other. But with energy costs that are twice as high as those in China and the United States, the future of manufacturing on the continent is dire. And I don't think it's going to work very well. Just put some context to what my colleague here said on PISA. PISA in Europe, in the EU on average, PISA is 60 points on math, for example, lower than the PISA in East Asia. 60 points is 2 years of schooling. So the taxpayer pays massively, pays through the nose. 6% of GDP for education gets, 2 years of schooling less through the quality of education. So I think I gave you 4, but I think it's absolutely essential. I mean, it's often very interesting when we talk about financing, that I think there is a bit of a European bent that we send, well, how are we going to put this on the budget? Common bonds, common this, common that. The private sector has to do most of the investments, right? So it's not a matter of governments whether issuing common bonds or even at the national level. I think the private sector has to be unleashed to finance all these new, investments in digital technologies where the EU is lagging, investment in innovation, and so on and so on. So I think we have to unleash this private sector dynamism and not keep talking about how can the government, by issuing common bonds, can do something, because I think this is going to go into a very bad corner. The World Bank, for the World Bank, there are 4 countries of the EU that are clients: Bulgaria, Croatia, Romania, and Poland. There we do some financing, but obviously these countries are at high income level. These projects are not as they were 10 years or 15 years ago. In the rest of the EU, we don't have any financing arrangements. Thank you.
Now, we have only 2 minutes and 50 seconds, but I want to ask you, if we try to do all these economic financial reforms, will we lose on our social security net, on the guarantees that we have for our workers? Doesn't that seem more more of a capitalism that we don't want in the European Union. And my other question is, if we don't do them, maybe we lose them anyway. Okay, yes, yes.
No, I fully agree with your second interpretation. If we actually don't have much stronger growth in productivity, in output, if we don't have more business dynamism, we're going to have to make a great compromise between the social goals, the economic goals, the climate goals, because it's not going to work. I mean, countries that grow at 5% a year can do many more things than countries that grow at 0.5% a year. And so therefore, unless we get this productivity going, it's going to be very difficult to deliver on all the promises of the European growth model.
Mr. Arghyrou? Yes, we talked also at some point, you remember, about pensions and what is going on in France. And you told me that we need also to reform that because now we are living till we are 90, so...
Yes, well, in Greece we have done these reforms, that is true. What I'm saying here is the following, that human nature is such that is wary of change and surprises. That is typical and understandable. At the same time, human nature is such that we want to improve our lifestyle. We want to improve our living standards. So on the one hand, you have the desire and the drive for more, and at the same time, you have the fear of the unknown and the risk aversion of losing what you have. Typically, eventually, the motivation for improving one's living standards in the long term prevails, and that is why we have progress. So I believe that we are going to do the reforms, otherwise we will scale back our welfare. The big question is whether we do it in a way which is proactive and in a way which maximizes the efficiency, or we, as Marco was saying, respond to big crises and then we run after developments. So yes, the reforms have to be done, because if we don't do the reforms and if we don't adapt our European way of life, we will not have it at the end, and we will protect it, and I'm sure that we will do what is necessary, but let's avoid the unnecessary cost of doing what is necessary.
Ms. Ruhe?
Well, it's hard to add to those remarks, frankly, because I agree completely that by not acting, one becomes a victim of events as opposed to directing and controlling. So I think that taking charge and sort of saying, and yet, you know, there has been a lot of political backlash. Look at the backlash in France to some of Macron's reforms, because those are reforms that are widely needed, not just in France. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done to create the understanding among the population that this is a smaller price to pay to maintain their futures at the way they like them than it is to reject reform and then have consequentially much worse situation.
Marco, 2 words. We are
Yeah,
out of
zero,
time.
so.
Yes, I know, that's right. I said 2 words.
I'm in love forever with the flexicurity model of the northern countries. So product markets, labor markets being very flexible, but having an educational training system which protect workers not on the specific job but in the markets. And if you look, and I published a paper actually last week on investment gaps, if you look at the northern countries, they have this system of flexicurity. They have deeper and more developed capital markets, and they have public finances which are, you know, sound, and subsidies targeted actually to innovation firms. If you look at the investment gaps in innovation technologies, these countries here, they are the innovation hub of Europe. So I think there is something, we cannot all become Danish, but
we can try.
But we could try.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.